All right, HTL community. So we're here with, some would say, the infamous Erik Kain from Forbes. Others would say one of the strongest proponents for the retake or hold the line movements from the Mass Effect. Personally, I say he's probably one of the more balanced people out of all the gaming journalism that I saw from the whole retake movement. But that's just my take. I will state right now, any opinions or whatnot expressed in this interview are those of the person and not necessarily Forbes or holdtheline.com. So, Erik, how long have you been writing about video games and the business trends and effects?
Let's see. I have been writing about video games for approximately just under a year, I would say. So probably about 10 months, give or take.
So when the whole Mass Effect theory thing blew up, that was kind of the welcome to how gamers react.
Yeah, that was a big, that was sort of the launch of my writing more exclusively about video games. You know, I was writing more about sort of video games and technology and sort of catching up with the video game scene, because I had taken several years away from video games when we first started having kids, and you know, I was just getting back into it, and Mass Effect was sort of almost a surprise. That whole controversy was really out of left field for me.
I think it was out of left field for just about everybody on every side. What convinced you to report on video, get back into reporting on video games and not so much focusing on the traditional topics of like what you focused on before of like tech and business?
Yeah, I like to write about things that interest me. That was a big part of it. I wanted to write about something where I could talk about issues like storytelling, creative processes, and I've always liked video games. You know, I've played video games my whole life, and it was something I think that Forbes also was interested in covering more, so it was just sort of a good fit. And I wasn't really happy with what I was writing previously, and it sort of just clicked, I guess.
I'm not sure how relevant that question is, but that's what the editorial team wants to know. So, how does that reason or reasons hold true in today's reporting environment?
I guess it doesn't really, huh?
Well, no, I know there's been some criticism of blogging's not really quote-unquote journalism by some. I know on a recent back and forth on your Twitter account there was some controversy there about the blogging is not really, you know, considered journalism, and you made the retort, I believe, of that it's actually more real journalism than, say, some of the more traditional forms.
I think what I said actually was that that there's really not much to distinguish blogging from journalism now, for better or worse. I think that a lot of journalists are also bloggers. A lot of bloggers also sometimes do more traditional journalism. I think there's really a hybrid going on, and I think it's just sort of happening, and people aren't really sure how to think about it. I mean, a few years ago, blogging was sort of an amateur thing. There weren't a lot of professional bloggers. There weren't a lot of people in traditional media who are also blogging. But I think that as the industry has shifted, it's sort of become you have to do both. And, you know, I write mostly opinion pieces and a lot of like more traditionally blog style pieces. But I've tried to sort of move also more in a journalistic direction with that, and I think that everybody is sort of coalescing around a sort of mixture of the two.
Okay, which leads in the next one. What particular rules, if any, do you follow when you write, say, an opinion piece or an actual, you know, journalism article for Forbes?
Well, I think it's been, for me, writing at Forbes has had its own share of learning curves. I think what I'm trying to do now is be really transparent. If I write about a game I've played, I try to say how much I've played of it. I try to get feedback from both sides of a story. I think during the Mass Effect controversy, I was really critical of BioWare without actually reaching out to BioWare and getting their take on it, and I feel bad about that now, because I think that my criticism would have been stronger with a more balanced take on all those issues. But what I try to do now is to get as many points of view as possible, try to be as transparent as possible, and try to interact as much as possible with readers and content creators and whoever else is involved in whatever I'm writing about.
I was going to say, because I know, at least for some of us on HTL, we did some things that we all weren't, looking back, they seemed innocent or whatever, and they, the cupcake thing or the M&M, it wasn't, it's kind of like a slap in the face for some of us, not all of us, but we all kind of learned something from it.
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't think that in the gaming community or the gaming industry there's been much of a presence of sort of grassroots consumer activism or any sort of consumer activism. I think because it's a relatively new industry. I think because many of the consumers are fairly young, and many of the companies are fairly young, and it's grown so rapidly. I think everybody is sort of on a learning curve, and I think the same goes for the gaming press. Though as a relative newcomer to the gaming press, I can only say so much. But I do think that every part of the industry is still learning quite a bit, which can make things difficult.
Do you feel that other reporters could have benefited from adopting, say, a code of conduct or similar rules to their reporting? Like with yours, you try to engage your audience and be transparent with what you're reporting about and what have you.
I think that transparency is always good. Engaging is always good. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of them probably do. I think that what is really going on is that there's a really, huge lack of trust between journalists and their readers and consumers of video games, and between developers and publishers. I mean, there's just no trust in anywhere, and I think that certainly more transparency could help create more trust and foster a better relationship between everybody. I mean, I said this like towards the beginning of the Mass Effect 3 controversy. I said I don't really like how hostile everything appears to be in gaming. It's such a I mean, it's supposed to be fun. Like, we're supposed to all be doing this because it's fun, but then there's so much money involved. There's so many issues, and there's so much mistrust that I think it takes some of the fun out of things. And it feels a lot like politics, which is notorious for not being transparent, for never giving any sort of straight answer, for always being in a state of conflict. And I used to write about politics, and I don't really enjoy that. So, I mean, as much as like I contributed to all that conflict at the time by taking a more critical or oppositional stance on a lot of those issues, I still think that, hopefully the long-term goal is that, the industry can get back to a better state and a better relationship between everybody involved. Which is not to say that the press should be less adversarial. I think that they should be more adversarial, because the job of the press is obviously to, get at the truth. And, you can't do that if it's always just, cozy relationships with everybody that's producing something. I think that there's a balance to be struck there as well. I mean, you want to have a good relationship with the publishers and the developers who you're covering, but you also want to be able to point out where they're wrong. And I think, like, there was a recent interview on Rock Paper Shotgun with about DRM and Ubisoft, and I think it was a great example of how a gaming journalist can be somewhat adversarial and really push hard questions and get some not necessarily great answers, but at least, get a good, a necessary rapport going between the industry and the press, so that the consumers have a good idea of what's actually going on.
I was going to say, because I remember there was I don't remember exactly where, but there was an article that was recently posted about that the industry needs to just communicate better. I don't remember exactly where that was. The gaming industry, from the developers and the publishers, needed to communicate better with the consumer base than they do. I want to say it's Kotaku, but I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think what we saw a lot of in the Mass Effect controversy was that I think people felt like they were being given insincere answers. And I think that people don't mind so much having an answer that they don't want to hear. They just want to know that it's genuine. And I think that what has happened with a lot of the big companies in gaming is that they've moved from, an industry dominated by smaller studios and, personalities and people you could actually sort of get to know, to big faceless corporations and a lot of PR. And you really saw that come out in spades with Mass Effect 3, and I think a lot of people just wanted a straight answer. They just wanted, and I think that there were some answers given by BioWare that did feel more sincere than others. But I think overall it's more of a reaction to a broader trend in the industry just to never really tell anybody anything that means anything. You just have a lot of PR speak.
And that is something that I noticed that Brian Fargo, from his Kickstarter with Wasteland 2, recently said that I have no personal animosity towards publishers, but I noticed his thing for publishers was, we're kicking ass without publishers being over our shoulder, or more or less is what he stated at was it the Unite conference for the Unity 3D gaming engine. So
Kickstarter's I've been really critical of Kickstarter. I think the problem is
mostly the Oya.
Yeah, that, and then but just sort of the whole. I worry about bubbles, and I worry about whenever anyone seems too enthusiastic and not critical enough of something. If it's too good to be true, But I think that Kickstarter, what it is it symbolizes a new direction. And I think that what Brian Fargo said sums that up pretty well. And I think people are placing a lot of hope in that direction. I don't know if it'll pan out, but I can certainly see why.
I think a lot of it, at least in my opinion anyway, the look on the Kickstarters was you had those big personalities that aren't the nameless faceless like Activisions or EAs or whatever. You had like a Tim Schafer, you had a Brian Fargo, or you had a personality to go with it, not just a studio name or a publisher name to go with it. And I think that's why a lot of people probably back those, because they seem more personal.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yep. And there's a lot more interaction with consumers. I mean, you see, like I was looking at the Grim Dawn Kickstarter project, and they really, they pulled their backers a lot. They interacted with them a lot. They tried to get feedback, and they used some of those ideas that they got from fans or backers or whatever you call people who give them money. And I think that's cool. I think people really like that. And I think that that's, again, kind of what a lot of different creative people or bloggers or any number of people in an internet era are going to have to do. They have to interact more. And I have interviewed several musicians, and these, the musicians always say now, they're not using the big record companies anymore. They have to rely on their fans a lot more. They're in more direct contact with the people who purchase their goods. And I think that that's what Kickstarter does in the gaming world, in a big way. So
what do you feel is probably some of the biggest issues for the mainstream media when it comes to reporting games?
Like non-gaming press media?
Yeah, like non-gaming. The Fox incident with the original Mass Effect that came out, that kind of stuff.
I didn't pay attention to the mainstream media that much during the Mass Effect thing. I think what I always notice with the mainstream media is that anytime anyone gets killed, they blame video games for it. And I think that it's just video games in the mainstream press are still just sort of on the back seat. They don't really care about video games all that much, despite the enormous amount of money that's involved. It's still sort of kid stuff. So I think the biggest problem there, and it's probably shifting. And I know a lot of the big mainstream outlets do have gaming blogs and stuff now, but I think that they just don't take it seriously. And I'm not sure what, the Washington Post's readership really wants in a gaming coverage from the Washington Post, for instance.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's really a problem so much as I wish that they would stop bringing out the same old arguments every time there's a mass shooting, that it's, obviously video games that were the problem, or Marilyn Manson or whatever.
I very much agree. I don't know how many times I'm sick of hearing, oh, it was Doom, oh, it was Marilyn Manson, oh, it was GTA. The argument kind of loses its point after how many units of a game is sold relative to that one particular incident.
Or how many, just how many games and how many gamers there are, and virtually none of them are psychopathic killers. So...
what do you feel is the biggest issue the gaming media as a whole has to deal with today compared to, say, when you started reporting less than a year ago?
The biggest issue, I think it goes back again to the trust issue. I think that there just seems to be so much hostility between the media and the people that they're reporting for. And however that trust will be rebuilt, I don't know. I know a lot of people say that, places like, some of the main gaming sites out there rely too much on advertising dollars for their, coverage of games. I don't think that we can get away from that model, frankly. There's just no way to sustain a gaming website without game advertisements. But there does need to be some way to make... and I think transparency is a good way to go about this, but to make sure that, that when you read a review at a website that is advertising that game, you're getting a fair review. Or when you're having coverage of business issues within, for a specific company and they're advertising on that site, what is the conflict of interest, if any? I mean, and sometimes I think that the conflict of interest isn't explicit so much as it is a set of incentives or disincentives. And I think that, if you know that your company gets a bunch of advertising dollars from this gaming company, then you're going to maybe want to softball it a little bit more. And I think that somehow that's, that at least that the impression of that has to change. And because I don't think that the actual business model is going to change. There's just, very little. There's nothing I can see replacing gaming advertising on those sites, because we live in an era where nobody, subscribes to print magazines, and, they're not going to advertise non-gaming stuff because that just wouldn't make sense. So.
I was going to say, I know a lot of people within the Hold the Line community, a lot of their trust issues stem from the fact that, other than not just specifically the Mass Effect controversy, but also that there seems to be a disconnect between the reviewers and, say, the consumer. There seems to be that disconnect where they're not really reviewing it as so much like a movie critic will tell you whether or not wait for this to go to DVD or wait for don't go see this. They're telling you where you should spend your money. And I know a lot within the community feel that that's not what the reviewers are doing. They're just telling you about the experience.
Right. And
they don't feel that's actually helpful to them.
Yeah. It's tricky, though. I mean, you write something that's critical of a game. Like, I've been writing about Guild Wars 2 a little bit lately, and I've been pretty critical of that. And, of course, being critical of that is strictly taboo for a large portion of gamers who really like Guild Wars 2. Yeah. And then again, if I were super positive about it, then there would be a lot of people who hate Guild Wars 2, and they would say that I'm, in the pockets of ArenaNet or whatever. So there's no real good answer for gaming critics. I think the best thing you can do is just be upfront about your own bias, how much you've played. I went into my Guild Wars 2 writing saying I don't like MMORPGs. I just don't particularly like them, and I'd like to, and I'm still waiting for one that actually appeals to me, but I don't particularly like them. And, I say that about games with too many cutscenes. I'm very opinionated, and I just let people know what that is, so that if they disagree with me, they know why, and if they agree with me, they know what to expect. And I have a hard time telling people how to spend their money, honestly, because I just, I don't know. Everyone has such different tastes, so you just have to tell them what's good, what's bad, what your biases are, and then let them make the decision. I think with some games that are just outright bad, you can say don't buy this game or wait for it to come out. But a lot of games are good. They may not be great, or they may not really appeal to you. But I'm not going to tell people not to buy Guild Wars 2, because a lot of people who like MMOs probably will like Guild Wars 2. So I think I would feel the same way writing about movies, but the difference is that with a movie you can watch it in 2 hours, think about it for a few hours and write a review. With a game, you're investing quite a lot more time and money, and it's a little bit more. The stakes are a little bit higher, I think. On a $60 game, the stakes are higher than on a $10 movie ticket.
Very true. All right, let's see. What changes have you witnessed since you got into reporting games, as far as the gaming media reporting on gaming issues, DRM, whatever, take your pick?
It's hard to say. It hasn't been that long. It seems like there was definitely an acknowledgement of fan backlash during the Mass Effect issue. I think you saw a lot of sites like IGN. They published originally a very glowing review of Mass Effect 3, and then they later had a roundtable where they published multiple perspectives. And I actually think that doing something like that is a great answer to the broader issue of not trusting a website's opinion. I think that a website, like any gaming website, should publish multiple reviews always, because then you at least get to see what different people within the organization believe, and you don't just have this is what IGN thinks about Mass Effect 3. This is what such and such thinks, and here's what their colleagues think, and hopefully that would lead to a more balanced approach. But and I think that that's kind of one of the interesting things about Forbes, because we're all sort of very independent in what we write about, and we can conflict a bit in our opinions, and there's not a lot of coordination. So that's sort of organic and spontaneous. We do have a review blog now, where we do coordinate who does what, but we all have our individual blogs as well. But in terms of changes, I don't know if we've seen anything really fundamental change, but I think that I also have such a limited perspective. I can't say for sure if anything profound or important has taken place.
What do you think is probably the most positive change and the most negative change to gamers in relation to the media?
Since then, or just ever?
Even going back as just a gamer before you started writing about them, or just in general.
Well, when I just played games, I very rarely read about games. Honestly, I think I had Game Informer, last time I was playing, because I had, I would get used games at GameStop, and I would read that, and mostly just to get previews of what was coming out. I didn't do a lot of online reading at the time. And when I was younger, I think I had some more old school gaming magazines. But I think that a good thing is that I think that more people are active in reading about games and writing about games, and there's sort of there's more interaction and involvement by consumers, and I think that shows that the consumers of games are definitely not the kids that everyone makes them out to be. I think that they're all getting quite a lot older and care more about where their money's going and who they're supporting, and the industry at large. And so I think it's healthy to see more engagement by consumers with the media, and I think that inevitably is going to cause some friction. And I think that I've described it all before as just growing pains, and I do think it's growing pains. I think that the media will, I think that the disappointment with the media will probably result in more and better media that appeals to a more critical audience.
During your coverage of the Mass Effect 3, retake, movement, mobile line, what was some of the biggest things that it showed you?
Well, I think it gave me a good introduction to the hostility that was going on between media industry and consumer. I think that I think I've touched on that earlier, but probably just realizing that there was such controversy in the gaming market today. With a lot of issues like Day One DLC and DRM, it's gotten a lot worse since I was playing games in the past. I think, before my gaming hiatus, I don't recall ever hearing the term DLC. There were expansion packs, and, for $20 you could get, a huge expansion pack to World of Warcraft or whatever. I think that, and DRM was still relatively innocuous and not as well. There wasn't as much of it. It was certainly starting at the time to become a problem. But so I think that controversy just highlighted a lot of the issues, the very real issues in today's gaming industry. And so I think it was a good refresher course in a way to sort of get up to speed on why people are so upset and why the industry is doing. And I think the industry, to defend them just a little bit, I think it's very competitive. There are a lot of publicly traded companies who have to answer to shareholders, and I think a lot of DRM maneuvering is sort of for show in a lot of ways. I think they do legitimately understand that DRM doesn't work as advertised, but I think that it's part of their presentation. They have to show that they're coming up with ways to keep piracy down, just like a brick and mortar store would have to come up with ways to keep shoplifting down. They equate the two, even if that's not a legitimate equation. So yeah, I think it was a good eye opener in a lot of ways.
If you could change one thing about the reports, what would it be?
My reporting,
yeah.
Just to try to get more information directly from BioWare and EA, to really contact them more and get their take. I don't think I probably would say some things differently. I think I was probably a little over the top at times, got a little carried away, but I don't think I would change any of the things I said. I think that they're all really legitimate issues. I think that a lot of the criticism of the gaming community was over the top as well, and I think that the actions of the gaming community were oftentimes over the top. But I think that I can sort of see why everyone was being over the top. But I think that if I were to do it again, I would try to be more balanced.
Do you feel, as many hardcore gamers, I hate that term, as many longtime gamers feel that the mainstream media has incentive to downplay certain issues like DRM, like Day One DLC, take your pick?
Probably has no incentive to even talk about them. They're very specific to gaming, and I think that for a lot of those mainstream companies, they probably just don't see an audience that would care or comprehend Day One DLC or DRM or free to play. They're going to write a fluff piece once in a while that goes into some of those issues. But I think that since there is a pretty reasonably robust gaming press out there, I think that it makes sense to cover it within the confines of the gaming press. I do think it's great that like a place like Forbes has has embraced more gaming coverage, and I think it would be great if other places did too. But I don't really see that happening, anytime soon, at least.
Currently speaking, what change would you like to see in the gaming media? I believe you've pretty much answered this, but
I guess just to add to it, though, the reliance on sport reviews, I think, is kind of misplaced. I mean, I've been doing some little mini sport reviews for the Forbes Game Review blog, which I always, do a longer series of reviews as well. But I think that there's too much reliance on a score, and the scores have all drifted into the 6 to 10 range, which is reasonable also because it's basically ABCDF or ABCDF scoring system. But I think that it's sort of artificial, and I think that it kind of enhances the other problems we've talked about. By scoring something, you sort of set it in stone, and you don't give any nuance. And it's sort of hard to say, like, what if I give a game a 7 out of 10? Does that mean people should go buy it? And 7 out of 10 isn't bad necessarily. It might be a great game for some people. So I think less reliance on that, more adversarial, interviews and discussions of the industry, and especially of a lot of the industry trends like free to play and always online and cloud gaming. I think there's just a lot of enthusiasm around those things in the industry and in the press as well, and I think that there's not enough being done to sort of critique where the industry is headed and whether we really want to mimic the big Korean MMO companies and their practices, so.
Which many would say is pay to win.
Action model, yeah.
Yeah. Many ask, why did you choose to comment favorably on the Hold the Line and retake Mass Effect movements as compared to other outlets that chose to detract from it?
I think I think of the media as being a institution which reports on news, but also try to keep the people they're reporting on as honest as possible. So I think when you're covering politics, you should be thinking about voters, not about politicians. You cover gaming or any other consumer industry, you should be thinking about the consumers, not just the industries producing the games. I mean, there's a lot of reason to be excited about a lot of the developers out there. There's a lot of cool games, and I have, my obsessions with some games and write fairly favorably about them. But I think in the end, you want to present people with as much consumer-friendly information as possible, and that's just what the media is supposed to do.
And I believe your favorite game currently would be Dark Souls.
I have a bit of an addiction problem when it comes to Dark Souls.
Especially with the PC fix where you can have anti-aliasing. Oh, come on. I thought that fix wasn't needed for the 1024x768 originally. That they were just going to oversample.
Honestly, the graphics issue is not nearly as big as the keyboard and mouse issue. The game is perfectly fine without the graphics fix. It just looks a lot better with it, but the mouse is, almost unforgivable. And I think the port, I don't know if the port was lazy, but it was definitely not a good port,
I was going to say, you can't play it without a controller. It's not a PC game. I'm sorry.
The PC is a wonderful tool. You can use all sorts of controllers on it, and I honestly think that the keyboard mouse thing, while wonderful for lots of kinds of games, it's not the best third-person melee games, but,
Yeah. Last question. Some gamers feel that there's a major disconnect between the game media and themselves. What do you think actually caused this particular issue?
I think no one thing caused the issue. I mean, I think it's a lot of the stuff we've touched on already. I think that a big part of it is that gaming is relative. Video games are relatively new, and especially video games as a really big business with you know, a large press to cover that business and all sorts of conventions. I think it's all still pretty young, and I think that a lot of the people covering gaming are essentially, you know, gamers themselves, and that, you know, every gamer has their opinions and they're fans of one game or one type of game or another, and so it's just, you're just sort of bound to have conflict. And I think that probably due to a lot of lack of transparency and, you know, a lot of suspicion, that disconnect just sort of grows and grows and festers. And yeah, I don't know if there's any one event or one company or one media, but it's sort of everything just piling on. I think that's the thing about Mass Effect 3 too, is I don't think that one game by itself caused such a huge stir. I just think it was sort of like the boiling point.
I was going to say, I've equated it to, it's about the point where gamers broke their controller, finally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is all the questions I have for you, Eric. Any games you're looking forward to that are coming out in the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, Torchlight 2, Dishonored. Let's see, what else? I mean, I'm looking forward sort of to Assassin's Creed 3. I haven't really been a fan of the franchise, but this one does look like it has some kind of neat things about it. I am mildly looking forward to Mists of Pandaria, the expansion to World of Warcraft. I'm not a big MMO fan, but like the idea of big kung fu panda types that also happen to be brewmasters. So, I can't remember off the top of my head. I've got a whole list of stuff that I'm going to be covering, so...
And what was the last tweet that I saw? Something about PlayStation Vita reviews?
I got a Vita, so I'm going to be, once there's some games to review, I'm going to be covering those. There's actually some cool-looking Vita games coming out, like Tearaway is really neat-looking, Soul Sacrifice. Of course, those are not anywhere near release, but yeah, so see how that goes.
Well, there you go, HTL community. I would like to thank Erik Kain for taking his time to do this interview. Much appreciated, Eric. And I'm sure the community will be very glad that you did it for him. So,
The invite.
Much appreciated.